The library at Westridge was the one room in the great house where Margaret Felbridge was permitted to disappear. And she had learned, in her weeks of service, to love it for precisely that. It was late, and the house above her was full of light and music, and people who did not know she existed. The autumn house party had filled every guest room and every corridor with strangers in silk, and the sound of them came down through the floor as a kind of weather, a distant brightness she was not part of and was not meant to be. Down here, among the cold shelves and the dying fire, there were only the books and the dust and herself, and the books did not care that her gown was grey, and her hands were chapped, and her name was one that no one in the rooms above would ever trouble to learn. She was reaching to draw down a volume from the high shelf, her cloth in one hand, when the door opened behind her. She turned, ready to make herself small, ready to murmur an apology and slip out by the servants' passage. And then she saw who it was, and the apology died in her throat. The Duke of Dunwood stood in the doorway with his back against it, as though he had shut it on something he could not bear, and his face, which she had only ever seen arranged into a perfect aristocratic coldness, was not cold now. It was the face of a man who has run out of doors to close. He crossed the room in 4 strides. She had no time to curtsy, no time to retreat. He took her hand, her actual hand, her servant's reddened hand, in both of his, and he bent his head close to hers, and he said, low and rough and desperate, the 5 words that would undo the whole, careful nothing of her life. Pretend you're my fiancée tonight. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. To understand how a housemaid came to be standing in a duke's library at midnight, with her hand caught in his, and those 5 words ringing in the air between them. You must go back. Not far. Only a season. Only to the grey morning in early autumn when Margaret Felbridge first came to Westridge with everything she owned in a single box, and the last of her dignity folded carefully on top of it. She had not been born to service. Her father had been a clergyman, the rector of a small good living in a green valley, a learned, gentle man who loved his books and his daughter, and was entirely unfit for the management of money. When he died, quietly in his chair, with a volume of sermons open on his knee, Margaret had discovered the size of the kindness with which he had ruined her. He had lent where he should have kept. He had given where he could not afford to give. He had signed his name, more than once, to secure the debts of men who called themselves his friends, and did not come to his funeral. By the time the bills were settled, there was nothing left, not the books, not the furniture, not the small income she had thought would keep her. There was a clergyman's daughter of 25, with a good hand and a quick mind, and a face that the world had never troubled to call beautiful. And there was the cold arithmetic of what such a woman might do to keep from starving. She might have been a governess. She had tried. But a governess required references and a certain hard brightness, a willingness to be charming to the mothers and invisible to the fathers. And Margaret had discovered in herself a stubbornness that would not bend that far. She might have married, perhaps, some respectable man who wanted a sensible wife and a tidy house. But the respectable men she met wanted dowries she did not have, and she had decided, in the worst of that first winter, that she would rather scrub a floor she had chosen than share a bed she had been sold into. So she had become a housemaid. She had folded her father's name away with her mother's wedding ring, the one thing she had not let the creditors take, and she had taken a place in service under her own name, because she would not add a lie to the long list of things the world had stripped from her, and because no one in a great house ever asks a maid her history. A maid is hands. A maid is a grey shape that carries the coals and blacks the grate, and turns to the wall when her betters pass. No one had asked Margaret Felbridge who she had been. That, she had thought, climbing down from the carrier's cart at the servants' entrance of Westridge, with her box on her shoulder, was perhaps the only mercy left to her. To be no one was at least to be safe. Westridge itself had taken her breath the first time she saw it, and she had been ashamed of that, because a maid is not supposed to be moved by the house she cleans. It was an old place, grey stone gone gold in patches with 300 years of weather, set in a fold of low green hills, with a long avenue of limes leading up to it, and a lake below it that held the whole sky on still mornings. It had not been built so much as it had grown, the way the great old houses do, one wing added to another across the centuries, until the whole thing sat upon the land as though it had risen out of it. It was beautiful, and it was cold, and Margaret learned quickly that the cold was not in the stone. It was in the master. The Duke of Dunwood was spoken of in the servants' hall the way one speaks of weather that cannot be helped. He was not cruel, the older servants said. He did not rage, did not strike, did not turn girls out without their wages. He was simply absent, even when he was present, a tall, cold, courteous man who moved through his own great house as though it belonged to someone else, and he had only been left to mind it. He was 34 and unmarried, which the housekeeper, Mrs. Dean, considered a scandal and a waste, and he showed, she said, no more interest in remedying it than he showed in anything else. He rode out alone. He dined alone. He sat alone in his study with his accounts and his land and his perfect unbroken solitude. And the house held its breath around him year upon year, and waited for something that did not come. Margaret saw him for the first time 3 days after her arrival, and what she noticed was not his coldness. It was his eyes. She had been told to expect grey. The maids said the Duke had eyes like the lake in November, that he could freeze a footman at 20 paces with a look. But when he passed her in the long gallery, and she turned dutifully to the wall as she had been taught, she made the small mistake of glancing up, and his eyes, when they met hers for the half of 1 second, were not grey at all. They were green. A deep, clear, surprising green, the green of deep water over moss. And they were not cold so much as they were guarded, the eyes of a man who has decided that it is safer to want nothing than to want and lose. He looked at her without seeing her, the way he looked at everything, and went on. And she stood with her face to the wall, and her heart doing something foolish. And she told herself it was only that she had not expected the green. She was wrong about that, though she did not know it yet. The library became hers by accident, and then by habit. It was a vast room, 2 stories of it, galleried and ladder-served, with more books in it than Margaret had known existed in the world, and no one ever went there. The Duke kept his reading in his study. The guests, when there were guests, preferred the drawing-room and the cards. The library was dusted once a fortnight, and otherwise forgotten. And Mrs. Dean, discovering that the new maid was tidy and quiet, and did not chatter, had given Margaret the care of it as a thing of no importance, a corner where a useless girl could do no harm. She had not understood, when she took it, what she was being given. She had been a clergyman's daughter. She had been raised among books, had read her way through her father's whole small library twice over before she was 16, had argued Latin with him across the supper table, and wept over poetry she was too young to understand. And then the world had taken the books along with everything else, and she had told herself she did not miss them. The way one tells oneself one does not miss a person who is not coming back. And now here was a room with 10,000 of them, and an hour each day in which she was alone with them, and no one to tell a maid she had no business reading the master's books so long as the dusting was done. So she read, she dusted, and she read, and the two became the same act, the cloth in one hand and the volume in the other, and for one stolen hour each evening, Margaret Felbridge was not a housemaid at all, but simply a mind in a room full of other minds, equal to all of them, smaller than none. It was the only place in England where she was still herself. She guarded it like a secret, which it was. She did not know that she was not the only one who came to the library to stop being what the world insisted on. The house party changed everything, as the house parties always did. Margaret had heard of them in the servants' hall before she ever saw one. Twice a year, Mrs. Dean said, the old dowager duchess descended from her own wing like a general taking the field, and filled the house with eligible young ladies and their ambitious mothers, and set siege to her grandson's solitude, in the hope of marrying him off before she died. Twice a year she failed. The Duke endured the invasions the way a rock endures the tide, courteous and immovable, and the young ladies played and sang and angled, and went home unbetrothed, and the dowager retired to her wing to plot the next campaign. This autumn's party arrived on a wet Thursday in a procession of carriages, and Westridge, which had held its breath for so long, let it out in a great gust of arrival and noise. There were 6 young ladies and their mothers, and a scattering of gentlemen to make up the numbers, and the Dowager Duchess presiding over the whole like a small, fierce queen. And for a fortnight there would be dinners and music, and a great ball at the end of it, and the maids would be run off their feet, and the Duke would be hunted through his own rooms by women determined to become a duchess. Margaret watched it all from the edges, as she watched everything, and she would have been content to go on watching, invisible and safe, if it had not been for the woman who came last, in her own carriage, a day after the others, and who was not on any list the dowager had drawn. Her name was Celeste, and she had once been promised to the Duke of Dunwood, and she had thrown him over, in front of all the world, to marry a richer man. Margaret learned the story the way a servant learns everything, in pieces, below stairs, from Mrs. Dean and the older footman who had been at Westridge when it happened. Years before, when the Duke was young, and they said a different man entirely, warm and laughing and open as a window in spring, he had loved Celeste with his whole undefended heart. They had been all but engaged. The whole county had expected it. And then the old Earl of Ashmore had come courting, with his great title and his greater fortune, and Celeste had weighed the warm young man against the cold old Earl, and chosen the Earl. And she had done it not quietly, not kindly, but at a ball, in public, with a laugh, letting it be known that she had never seriously considered a man whose dukedom was so much land and so little ready money. She had humiliated him before everyone he knew. And the warm, laughing young man had gone into his great cold house and shut the door, and the man who came out, by degrees, over the years, was the man Margaret had passed in the gallery, the man with the guarded green eyes, who had decided it was safer to want nothing at all. And now the old Earl of Ashmore was dead, and Celeste, the widowed countess, was back. She arrived in black that was not quite mourning, black that had been cut by a London modiste to flatter rather than to grieve. And she came up the great staircase as though she had never left it. And she was, Margaret saw, carrying a tray of tea into the gallery as the carriage was announced. The most beautiful woman she had ever seen. Beauty like a blade. Beauty that knew exactly what it was worth and meant to spend it. "Why?" the Countess of Ashmore said, pausing at the top of the stair, looking about her at the hall she had once expected to be mistress of. How little it has changed. How perfectly, perfectly the same. She smiled, and the smile did not reach her eyes, and Margaret, standing forgotten with her tray, understood three things in the space of that smile. That this woman had come back to claim what she had thrown away. That she did not doubt for a moment that she would get it. And that there was nothing in her of warmth, nothing at all, only a great and frightened hunger dressed up as confidence. The hunger of a woman who has gambled everything on her own beauty, and is beginning, for the first time, to feel the years at her back. Margaret carried her tray on into the gallery, invisible, and thought no more of it than that. It was not her affair. Dukes and countesses played their games above stairs, and maids carried the tea, and the one had nothing to do with the other. She was wrong about that, too. The Countess of Ashmore went to work at once, and she worked the way a great general works, with patience and with no mercy at all. Margaret, invisible at the edges of every room, saw it all unfold, and she was perhaps the only person at Westridge who understood exactly what she was watching, because she was the only person there with nothing to gain by misunderstanding it. She watched the Countess take possession of the Duke by inches, a hand laid on his sleeve, in front of the other guests, a moment too long, a laugh recalling some old shared intimacy, pitched to be overheard. A way of saying his name, his given name, Jonathan, in a low voice in a crowded room, that drew every eye and made the young, marriageable ladies and their mothers fall back in confusion. Because how could any of them compete with a woman who had a history with him, who spoke to him as one speaks to a person one has loved? And the Duke, Margaret saw, could not fight it. That was the cruelty of the thing. He was a man whose whole armour was his coldness, his perfect, unbreachable courtesy. And the Countess had found the one weapon that coldness could not turn. She did not attack him. She claimed him. She behaved in front of the whole assembled party, as though their understanding had never been broken, as though the years and the Earl and the public humiliation had been a brief, unfortunate interlude now happily concluded, and to contradict her, to say plainly before the guests that there was no understanding and never would be again, would have been to reopen the old wound in public, to be once more the jilted boy, to give the county a second scene to laugh over. So he said nothing. And his silence, which was all he had, the Countess wore like an engagement ring. Margaret watched the trap close on him over 4 days, and she found, to her own surprise, that she could not look away, and that what she felt was not the distant interest of a servant in her betters' affairs. It was something nearer to anger. She knew what it was to be cornered by the world. She knew what it was to have one's silence taken for consent, one's dignity used against one. And she watched a cold, proud man be slowly stripped of the only protection he had left, in his own house, by a woman who had broken him once and meant to break him again for his money. And something in Margaret Felbridge, something she had thought the last bad winter had killed, woke up and would not lie down. She had no business feeling it. She told herself so, sternly, on the back stairs, with her arms full of linen. He was a duke. She was a maid. His ruin was nothing to her. A colder master would be no worse than a cold one. But she had seen his eyes, that first day in the gallery, and they had been green and guarded, and they had not been cruel, and she could not unsee them. We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. On the fourth night, the thing came to its head, and Margaret was in the library when it did. She had come down late, later than usual, because the great dinner had run on, and the work had run on with it. And she had thought the library safe, the whole party occupied above with cards and music, and the Countess's slow, public siege. She had a single candle, and an hour, perhaps, before she must climb to her cold attic and sleep. She had drawn down a volume of poetry, and was standing in the pool of her one small light, reading, when the door opened. And the Duke of Dunwood came in with his back to the door, and his face undone, and crossed the room, and took her hand, and said the 5 words, and the story caught up at last to its own beginning. Pretend you're my fiancée tonight. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Margaret looked up into his face, so close to hers, and she saw that he was not seeing her. Not really. He was seeing a way out, any way out, and she happened to be the way that fate had set in his path. She might have been a chair. She might have been the dust. He had not chosen her. He had only reached, drowning, for the nearest solid thing. She should have curtsied and stammered and fled. A maid does not let a duke hold her hand. A maid does not answer such a question at all. Why? She said instead, and her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. Should I do that, Your Grace? He blinked. It was, she would understand later, the first time in 4 days that anyone had asked him a real question. The first time in longer than that, perhaps, that anyone had answered his desperation with anything but pity or scheming. He let go of her hand, as though he had only just realized he was holding it, and he stepped back, and he looked at her, actually looked at her, the maid in the grey gown with the candle and the book of poetry, and she watched him see her for the first time. Because, he said slowly, the Countess of Ashmore has just informed the whole of my drawing-room that we are to be married, and the whole of my drawing-room believes her, because I have not contradicted her, because I cannot contradict her without becoming once more, in front of every gossip in 3 counties, the fool she made of me. And tomorrow night there is to be a ball, at which she means to have the thing announced. His mouth twisted. I have been standing in that room for an hour, Miss Whoever you are, watching a woman who despises me arrange to marry me for my rents, and I could not think how to stop her. And I came down here because it is the only room in the house where she is not. And I find I am not alone after all. I find there is a woman here. And the only thing in the world that would stop the Countess of Ashmore is for it to be understood, before that ball, that I am already engaged to someone else." "To a housemaid," Margaret said. He went still. "You are a housemaid. I am the girl who dusts this room, Your Grace. I have dusted it every evening for 7 weeks, and you have passed me in the gallery twice, and never once seen my face. I am the last woman in England you could pass off as a duke's intended, and the moment the Countess looks at my hands, she will know it, and you will be twice the fool you fear to be." She set the book down on the table, gently, because even now she would not treat a book roughly. "You do not want a fiancé, Your Grace. You want a wall to stand behind. And I am sorry for you. I am sorrier than you know. But I am not a wall, and I will not be torn down for your convenience and turned out without a character when this woman exposes me, which she will within the hour." She had meant it to end there. She had meant to curtsy and go. And she would have, except that the Duke of Dunwood did the one thing she had not braced for. He laughed. It was not a cruel laugh. It was a startled, broken, astonished laugh, the laugh of a man who has not laughed in years and has just remembered the shape of it. And it changed his whole cold face the way the sun changes a grey field. And Margaret, watching it, felt the foolish thing happen in her chest again, harder this time. "You are quite right," he said. "Every word. It is a mad idea, and it would never serve, and you owe me nothing, and you are entirely right to refuse me." He shook his head. "Forgive me. I have insulted you. I came down here drowning, and I reached for the first hand I found. And that is no way to treat any woman, let alone one with the wit to tell me so to my face. I have not been told a true thing in 4 days. I had forgotten how it sounds." He bowed to her then. A real bow. A duke bowing to a maid in a cold library at midnight. "Go to bed, miss. I beg your pardon. I will find another way, or I will be a fool, and either way it is not your burden to carry." And he turned to go. It was the bow that did it. It was the bow, and the laugh, and the green eyes, and the 4 days of watching a cruel, beautiful woman take a man apart for sport. It was Margaret's own stubbornness, the thing her father had given her along with the books, the thing that had made her scrub floors rather than be sold. It was the simple, unbearable fact that she knew exactly in her bones what it was to be cornered. And here was someone cornered, and walking away was a thing she had never in her life been able to do. "Wait," she said. He stopped. "One night," Margaret said. "Not the marriage, not the announcement. One night, the ball, where I stand at your side and let it be understood that there is an understanding between us, so that the Countess cannot have her announcement made, so that she goes home without her prize, and you keep your dignity. One night, and then I tell the household I have had a position offered nearer my home, and I leave Westridge quietly, and the engagement dissolves of its own accord the way such things do. A girl thought better of it. No scandal, no fool. You are not jilted. You are simply, regrettably, a bachelor again." She lifted her chin. "I will need a gown that does not come from a servant's box, and I will need someone to teach me which fork, because I was raised gently, but it was a long time ago, and I have forgotten the finer points. And I will need you to understand, Your Grace, that I am doing this because I cannot abide to watch that woman win, and for no other reason in the world, and that when it is done, I am gone, and you will forget my face again, as you forgot it before, and that will be best for both of us." The Duke of Dunwood looked at her for a long moment in the candlelight. "What is your name?" he asked. "Margaret Felbridge." "Miss Felbridge." He said it as though he were learning it, which he was. "You were raised gently. My father was a clergyman. He died poor. That is the whole of my history, Your Grace, and it is more than you have any need to know." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, the almost of one. "Tomorrow night," he said, "you will not be Miss Felbridge, the housemaid. You will be Miss Felbridge, the daughter of a gentleman, lately come to me through my grandmother's connections, to whom I have formed an attachment over the summer." He paused. "It is even nearly true. You have been under my roof all summer. I simply did not have the wit to see you." He bowed again, and this time there was something in it almost like respect. "Thank you, Miss Felbridge. I will not forget that you did not have to do this." "You will forget it within the month," Margaret said. "They always do." But she was wrong about that, too, and this time she half knew it, climbing the back stairs to her cold attic, with her heart going hard, and her head full of the green of his eyes. And she lay awake a long time that night, telling herself it was only the fear of being caught, and not believing herself for a moment. The Dowager Duchess of Dunwood knew the truth before breakfast, and chose, for her own reasons, to keep it. Margaret had expected the old woman to be the danger. She had thought the great, fierce dowager, who had spent 2 days arranging her grandson's marriage to one of her own carefully chosen young ladies, would be the first to denounce a housemaid raised up overnight to play the Duchess. But she had not understood the dowager, who was 80 years old, and had buried 2 husbands and a son, and a great many illusions, and who loathed the Countess of Ashmore with the clean, clear loathing of a woman who forgets nothing, and forgives only what deserves it. She sent for Margaret at 8 in the morning, before the household was properly awake, and Margaret went up to the great hung wing in the south of the house, certain she was going to be dismissed, and found instead a tiny, upright old woman in violet, sitting very straight in a great chair, who looked her up and down once, with eyes as sharp and black as a bird's, and said, "Sit down, girl. You are the maid my grandson means to pass off as his betrothed tonight." There was no point in lying. "Yes, Your Grace." "And you are a clergyman's daughter, fallen on hard times, and you took service rather than do something worse. And you have more sense in your head than every fashionable miss I have dragged into this house this fortnight put together." The dowager folded her hands on the head of her cane. "Do not look so astonished. I have eyes. I have watched you carry trays through my drawing-room for a week, and I have watched you watch us, and I know a gentlewoman when I see one wearing a maid's gown, the same way I know a fortune hunter when I see one wearing widow's black." Her old face hardened. "I will tell you what I know, Miss Felbridge, that you may understand what you have walked into. That woman downstairs broke my grandson's heart when he was 24 years old, in front of half of England, for a richer man, and I watched it close him up like a fist, and I have spent 10 years trying to find a key. And now her rich man is dead, and has left her, I am reliably informed, a great deal less than she expected, and a great many debts she did not, and she has come back to my house to do it all over again, to marry the boy she despised, for the rents she once thought beneath her, and to call it love. And he cannot stop her, because she has found the one cruelty he has no defense against, which is to be made a public fool a second time. Yes, Margaret said quietly. I saw it. You saw it. The dowager looked at her with something new in her sharp old eyes. Of course you did. The servants always see everything. It is the chief advantage of being thought furniture. Well, my grandson, in his desperation, has hit upon a mad scheme, and it will very likely come to grief. And if it does, the scandal will be worse than if he had simply married the harpy. And yet, she tapped the cane once on the floor. And yet I find I would rather see him risk a fine ruin standing up than accept a quiet one on his knees. So you will have your gown, Miss Felbridge. You will have my own woman to dress your hair. And you will have me at your elbow all evening to mend your mistakes before they are seen. And you will have, God help us both, my blessing. Because I have watched a great many women try to reach that boy for 10 years, and not one of them has ever once made him laugh, and I am given to understand that last night, in the library, you did. The black eyes glittered. What did you say to him? I told him I would not be torn down for his convenience, Margaret said. The Dowager Duchess of Dunwood put back her ancient head and laughed until she had to wipe her eyes. Oh, she said. Oh, you will do. You will do very well indeed. Now go and eat something. You are far too thin. And come back to me at noon. And we will see what can be made of a clergyman's daughter in a borrowed gown. The Countess of Ashmore is about to have the worst evening of her life, and I intend to enjoy every moment of it. The ball at Westridge was the second of the two great peaks of that autumn, and Margaret Felbridge walked into it on the arm of the Duke of Dunwood, and the whole room turned to look. She had not known what to expect of herself in the glass. The dowager's woman had dressed her in a gown of deep green silk, cut down from one of the old Duchess's own, and refitted in a single frantic afternoon, and had done something to her plain brown hair that Margaret had not known could be done, and when at last they let her look, the woman in the mirror was a stranger. Not beautiful. Margaret was honest with herself even then. She would never be beautiful in the way the Countess was beautiful, all blade and brightness. But the woman in the glass had a kind of quiet that the Countess would never have, a stillness, a dignity that did not have to announce itself, and the green silk turned her ordinary hazel-brown eyes to something that caught the light, and she had stood looking at herself and thought, with a strange ache, this is what I might have been, if my father had kept his money and married me well, and given me the life I was born to. This is the ghost of the woman I never got to be. And then she had folded the ache away, because it served nothing, and she had gone down to play her part. The Duke met her at the foot of the great stair, and when he saw her, he stopped, and for one moment the perfect cold mask was simply gone, and what was underneath it was so naked that Margaret had to look away. Miss Felbridge, he said. Your Grace. You look, he said, and stopped, and seemed to decide against whatever he had meant to say, and offered her his arm instead. Shall we? The room, when they entered it, did exactly what the Dowager had promised it would do. It turned. It stared. A duke who had refused every woman in 3 counties for 10 years walked in with a quiet, green-eyed stranger on his arm, and his hand laid over hers, and the whisper went round the room like wind through wheat. Who is she? Who is she? Where did she come from? And the Dowager, sailing up beside them in full battle dress, answered the question for all of them in a carrying voice that brooked no doubt. My grandson's intended, the daughter of a most respected clergyman, an old connection of my own family. We had hoped to keep it quiet a little longer, but you know how these things will out. And the room, which wanted nothing so much as a story, drank it down whole. All but one. The Countess of Ashmore stood across the ballroom in her flattering black, and Margaret felt the woman's eyes find her and fix on her, and begin very slowly to understand that something had gone wrong with the evening she had so carefully arranged. And Margaret, who had spent her whole life learning to read the faces of people who did not bother to read hers, watched the Countess's beautiful face do a series of very small things in very quick succession. Surprise, calculation, and then beneath both, like a stone glimpsed under clear water, fear. She is afraid, Margaret thought. She has gambled everything on this, and she is afraid. The dear Countess crossed the room to them with her glass in her hand, and her smile in place. "Jonathan," she said warmly, ignoring Margaret entirely, laying her free hand on his sleeve in the old proprietary way. "What a delightful surprise you have sprung on us all. You sly creature, and to think you let me rattle on so." She turned then, at last, to Margaret, and looked at her, and the smile sharpened by a degree no one but Margaret would have caught. "And this is the fortunate young person. Miss Felbridge, is it? A clergyman's daughter? How very worthy." She let the word fall like a coin onto a counter. "You must tell me, my dear, who are your people? The Felbridges of... where was it? I confess I cannot quite place them. And I do place everyone. It is a tiresome gift." It was the first thrust, and it was beautifully made. A clergyman's daughter would have people, a county, a connection. A housemaid would not, and could be exposed in a single ignorant answer in front of the listening crowd. Margaret felt the Duke go tense beside her. She felt the room lean in. And Margaret Felbridge, who had carried this woman's tea and watched her work for a week, smiled and made the first of the three choices that would decide everything. "My people are dead, Lady Ashmore," she said, in a voice that was perfectly composed and perfectly clear, and carried just exactly as far as the Countess's had. "My father was the rector of a small living in the West Country, a learned and a generous man, too generous, as it proved, for he died leaving more debts than fortune, having spent his life lending to friends who did not repay him. So you will not have heard of us. We were never grand enough to be placed. We were only good." She held the beautiful, furious eyes with her own steady ones. "I find people are often surprised to learn that goodness and grandeur are not the same thing. I learned it young. It has saved me a great deal of disappointment." There was a silence around them, the particular silence of people who have heard a blade drawn. And then someone, somewhere in the listening circle, gave a small involuntary laugh, quickly stifled, and Margaret saw the Countess of Ashmore understand that she had, for the first time in the evening, lost an exchange in public, and to a nobody, and the fear under the beauty came nearer to the surface. "How charming," the Countess said, "to be so very content with so very little." And she turned the conversation gracefully to other things, and drifted away. And the danger had passed, for tonight. It was much later, when the dancing had begun, and the room had absorbed the new engagement into its endless appetite for novelty, that the Duke drew Margaret out through the long windows onto the terrace, into the cold, clean dark, away from the heat and the eyes. "You should not have made an enemy of her for my sake," he said. "She will not forgive that. She will go to work on you now, and she is very good at it, and you are leaving in any case, so there was no need." "There was every need," Margaret said. "She meant to expose me in front of all of them and watch you flinch. I would rather take the blow standing than let her have that." She looked out over the dark gardens, the lake below catching the last of the light from the ballroom windows. "Besides, I have been spoken down to by experts, Your Grace. Your Countess is not even the most accomplished. She is merely the most frightened." He was quiet for a moment. The music came faintly through the glass behind them. "You keep saying that," he said. "Frightened. Everyone else in that room sees a great, beautiful, confident woman who broke my heart and may yet have my hand. You look at her, and you see fear." "Because I know what it looks like," Margaret said simply. "I have worn it. A woman who has nothing left but her beauty, and has begun to feel the years coming for it, and has gambled her whole future on one last throw. That woman is the most frightened creature in the world, Your Grace, and the most dangerous, because she has nothing left to lose. She does not love you. I am sorry to say it so plainly. She needs you, which is a different thing, and a colder one, and you must not mistake the one for the other again, or she will ruin you a second time, and you will let her, because you are lonely, and loneliness will believe almost anything." She had said far more than she meant to. She heard it land. The Duke had gone very still beside her in the dark. "You see a great deal," he said at last, "for a woman who dusts a library." "I see a great deal because I dust a library," Margaret said. "No one performs for the furniture, Your Grace. You learn the truth of people only when they have forgotten you are in the room. I have learned the truth of half of England that way. It is not a comfortable education." And then the Duke of Dunwood did the thing that no one at Westridge was permitted to see. He leaned his arms on the cold stone balustrade, and he bowed his head, and the perfect mask came all the way off, there in the dark, where only Margaret could witness it. And he said, in a low, rough voice that had nothing of the Duke left in it at all, "I loved her. You should know that, since you have undertaken to save me from her. I loved her the way you love something when you are young and have never been hurt, with my whole self, holding nothing back." And she stood up in a room very like that one, and told 3 counties that she had never seriously considered marrying so much land and so little money, and they laughed, Miss Felbridge. That is the part I have never been able to put down. Not that she left. People leave. But that they laughed, and I had to stand there and let them and smile, and I decided that night that I would never again give anyone the power to make a room laugh at me. And I have kept that promise for 10 years, and it has cost me, I think, everything that was ever warm in me, and I did not even know how much it had cost until a housemaid told me last night that she would not be torn down for my convenience, and I laughed for the first time in longer than I can remember, and I thought, there is a real thing. I had forgotten what they sounded like. The terrace was very quiet. Below them, the lake held the light. Margaret stood beside the wounded man in the dark, and felt her careful resolution coming apart in her hands, and she knew, with a clear, cold certainty, that she was in a great deal of trouble. "You are not a fool, Your Grace," she said softly. A fool is a man who learns nothing. You learned to guard yourself, and you guarded yourself too well. And that is not foolishness. It is only grief that went on too long. There is a difference. I have made the same mistake. I told myself after my father died that I would never again let myself want anything I could lose. And I have kept that promise too. And it has kept me safe, and it has kept me alone, and I am beginning to suspect that safe and alone are the same word said twice. She made herself stop. She had said far, far too much. We should go in. We will be missed, and we are meant to be in love, and lovers do not stand on cold terraces discussing their grief. No, he agreed. He straightened. The mask came back, but not all the way, never quite all the way again. Miss Felbridge, Your Grace, when this is over, when you have gone to your position nearer your home, that does not exist, that you invented on the instant to give me a way to release you, where will you actually go? Margaret looked at him and told the truth, because she had run out of anything else. I do not know, she said. Another house, another grey gown, another library to dust, if I am very lucky. She smiled, and it cost her. Do not look at me like that, Your Grace. It is not a tragedy. It is only a life. A great many people live it. I have my books, an hour a day when no one is watching, and that is more than most. I will do very well. And she went in, because she could not bear to stand there one moment longer, and the Duke of Dunwood stood alone on the terrace for a long time after, looking at the door she had gone through, and did not go in until the cold had got all the way into his bones. The Duke of Dunwood had not meant to fall in love with his own housemaid, and he was aware that this was exactly the thing every man tells himself while it is happening. He watched her through that long week with a helpless attention he had not paid to anything in years. He watched her at the dinners, carrying the false engagement, with a composure that shamed the trembling, marriageable girls, turning the sly questions of the mothers aside, with a quiet wit that never once drew blood it did not have to. He watched the servants watch her, the footmen and the maids, who knew exactly who she was, who had worked beside her, who might have resented a fellow servant raised so absurdly above them, and he saw that they did not resent her. They were fiercely, secretly proud, as though one of their own had walked into the enemy's camp and planted a flag, and old Mrs. Dean guarded the truth of her like a dragon over gold. He had not known in 10 years that his own household was capable of such warmth. He had simply never given it anything to be warm about. And he watched her in the unguarded moments, when she believed no one saw, and those were the ones that undid him. The way she touched the spines of the books in passing, as one touches the hand of an old friend. The way she was kind to the youngest and plainest of the marriageable girls, the one the others left in corners, drawing her out at dinner with a gentleness that asked nothing back. He had spent 10 years deciding that warmth was a weakness he could not afford. And here was a woman who had been given every reason in the world to go cold, and had refused, who had been ground down by life and come out of it gentle, and he understood, watching her, that her gentleness was not weakness at all. It was the most stubborn courage he had ever seen. It cost her something to stay kind every day. She paid it anyway, and told no one the price. I am in a great deal of trouble, he thought, which was the very thing she had thought on the terrace, neither of them knowing the other had thought it first. He found her in the library on the 5th afternoon, alone, with a book. She rose when he came in, the old servant's reflex, and he said, "No, sit. You are meant to be my betrothed, and my betrothed does not stand when I enter a room." So she sat, slowly, watching him, and he came and looked at the book open in her lap, and saw that it was Greek. "You read Greek," he said. "My father taught me." He said a clergyman's daughter, who could not read her testament in the original, was only half educated, and he could not afford the other half in gowns. So he gave it to me in languages instead. She closed the book over one finger. "I have not held a Greek text in 3 years, Your Grace. I had forgotten how much I missed the very shapes of the letters. It is a foolish thing to miss." "It is not foolish." He sat down across from her, which a duke does not do across from a maid, and found that he did not care in the least. "Read me what you were reading." Aloud. And she did. And then she told him what it meant, haltingly at first, and then freely. And from the passage she went to her father, and from her father to the small green valley, where she had been a happy, clever child in a house overflowing with books, and the Duke of Dunwood, who had been raised to think conversation a kind of fencing, sat and listened to a woman speak about the things she loved, and was happier than he could remember being. He understood, listening, that this ordinary, unbearable thing, 2 people in a quiet room talking of what they loved, was the thing his cold house had been missing for 10 years, the thing no rank or rent had ever once been able to buy back. He had thought himself lonely. He had not known, until he stopped, how lonely. "Why do you look at me so?" she said at last, breaking off, suddenly shy. "Because I am trying," the Duke said, "to remember why I ever believed that wanting nothing was the safer course. I find I cannot, at present, recall the argument." The Countess of Ashmore came to Margaret 2 days later, when the deception should have ended, and had not. That was the trouble with the lie. It would not stay one night. The ball had passed, the announcement had not been made, the Countess had been checked but not defeated, and she had not gone home. She lingered all that week, watching, and the guests lingered with her, because the engagement was the most interesting thing to happen at Westridge in a decade, and to leave would be to miss the rest of it. So the fiction had to be maintained, day upon day, Margaret playing the Duke's betrothed at every dinner, and every walk, and every interminable evening of cards, and the more she played it, the harder it became to remember that it was a fiction, and the more she came to dread the moment, drawing always nearer, when she must dissolve it and go. The Countess found her alone in the morning room, where Margaret had been left to write the Duke's notes, a task the supposed fiancée might plausibly do, and the Countess shut the door behind her, and the smile was gone. "I know what you are," the Countess of Ashmore said. Margaret set down the pen. "Do you, Lady Ashmore?" "You are a servant." The beautiful face was hard and white. "I had it from your own housekeeper, who is loyal but not clever, and who lets slip a thing or two to my woman over a glass of Madeira. There is no Miss Felbridge, gentlewoman. There is a housemaid called Margaret, who blacks the grates and dusts the library, and whom that desperate man has dressed up in his dead mother's silk to keep me off." She came closer. "One word from me, in that drawing-room, and you are finished." He is finished. The whole county will laugh at him again, harder this time. The great Duke of Dunwood reduced to engaging his own char to avoid a respectable widow. He will never recover from it. You will be turned out without a character, and you will starve, because a girl dismissed for fraud does not find another place. She paused, and the cruelty arranged itself back into sweetness. Or, Margaret said, or you go, tonight, quietly. You tell him you have thought better of it. You leave Westridge, and you say nothing to anyone ever, and I will say nothing either. And I will give you, for your trouble, a sum of money that a girl in your position will not see again in 20 years of service. £50, Margaret. £50, and your silence. And you walk away from a man who is not yours, and never could be, and start again somewhere new, with more in your pocket than you have ever held in your life. Or you stay, and I expose you, and you have nothing, and he has less. Those are the terms. I am, you see, a very practical woman. I always have been. It is why I am still standing when softer women have gone under. And there it was. Margaret looked at the beautiful, frightened, ruthless woman, and she understood that she was being offered, quite genuinely, the most money she had ever been offered for anything, the price of years of safety, in exchange for doing the very thing she had always meant to do anyway, which was to leave. She should have taken it. It was, by every measure of sense she possessed, the only sane choice. The lie could not last. She was leaving regardless. To leave with £50 rather than nothing was not even a betrayal. The Duke would be no worse off than the plan had always meant him to be, and she would be immeasurably better. And Margaret Felbridge made the second of her three choices, and it was the maddest of them, and she made it without hesitation. "No," she said. The Countess blinked. "No? No, Lady Ashmore. I will not take your money. Not because I am too proud to need it. I am not. £50 would change my life, and we both know it. I will not take it, because the whole of the bargain is that I help you do to him again precisely what was done to him before, and I find that I would rather starve than be the instrument of that a second time. You broke that man once for money. You will not break him twice through me. I would rather be exposed. I would rather be turned out. I would rather scrub steps in the rain for the rest of my life than take your money to leave him to you. And if that makes me a fool, then I am a fool, and I find I do not mind it nearly as much as I expected to." She picked the pen back up. "You may expose me whenever you like. I will not stop you. But you will do it without my help, and you will do it knowing that you offered a housemaid £50 to be as faithless as you are, and she would not take it. I think, Lady Ashmore, that will trouble you more than you expect. I think you have not met very many people lately who would not take it." The Countess of Ashmore stared at her, and for one moment the whole beautiful structure of her face came down, and what was under it was exactly what Margaret had said was under it. A frightened, aging woman with nothing left but a gamble. And Margaret felt, looking at her, not triumph, but a kind of pity that was almost worse. And the Countess saw the pity, and could not bear it, and turned and went out without another word. And Margaret sat alone in the morning room with the pen in her hand, and understood that everything was about to break, and that she had made it break, and that she could not for her life have chosen otherwise. She went to the Duke that same night, and made the third choice, the one that was meant to save him, and that she was sure would cost her the last thing she had. She found him in the library, their library, where it had all begun, and he was not reading. He was standing at the cold window, looking out at the dark, and he turned when she came in, and something in his face when he saw her made the words she had prepared go to ashes in her mouth. "It has to end," she said, before she could lose her nerve. "Tonight, Your Grace. The Countess knows. She had it from below stairs. She knows I am a servant, and she means to expose me, and I have refused her bribe to go quietly, which means she will do it publicly and soon, and the only thing left that we can choose is the manner of it. So let me choose. Let me go tonight, of my own accord, before she can make her scene. I will tell the household I have had bad news from home, that the engagement was a mistake, that I am not what I seemed, whatever you like. I will take the blame entirely. I will let it be understood that I deceived you, that I am an adventuress who imposed upon a good man. And you may be angry with me publicly, and no one will laugh at you, because a man who is deceived is to be pitied, not mocked, and pity you can survive. And I will go, and in a season it will be forgotten, and you will be free of her, and free of me both, which is what you wanted from the first. A wall to stand behind. Only the wall is leaving before it can fall on you." She was crying, she discovered, which she had not meant to do. She who never cried. "It was always going to end, Your Grace. I told you so the first night. They always forget my face. Let me go before this one breaks you worse than she did." The Duke of Dunwood crossed the room. He did not take her hand this time. He stood in front of her, close, and he looked down into her wet, furious face, and he said very quietly, "No. You do not understand. If you do not let me go, she will." "I understand perfectly," he said. "I understand that you refused £50 to leave me to her. My grandmother had it from the Countess's own woman within the hour. There are no secrets in this house, and never were. You taught me that yourself. I understand that you have spent a week being magnificent in my dead mother's silk for no reward, but the satisfaction of watching a cruel woman fail. And that now, having watched her threaten to ruin you, your response is to offer to ruin yourself instead, to paint yourself as an adventuress and walk out into the cold to spare me a moment's embarrassment. I understand that you are the only person who has come into this house in 10 years who wanted nothing from me, and that I have spent that week falling, against every promise I ever made myself, completely and helplessly in love with a woman who dusts my library, and that you are standing here offering to disappear out of my life forever, and call yourself a fraud to do it." His voice was not steady. "And I'm telling you no, Margaret. No, I will not let you go. I will not be saved by your ruin. We are finished pretending. I'm done with it." The clock ticked. 1 second. 2. 3. "You cannot mean it," Margaret whispered. "You are a duke. I am a maid. There is no end to this where we are happy. There is only scandal, and your ruin made worse, not better, and I will not." "Then let it be scandal," he said. "Let them laugh. Do you know, I find I no longer care if they laugh. I have spent 10 years arranging my whole life around the terror of being laughed at, and it has bought me a cold house and an empty bed and a heart I had forgotten how to use. And then a clergyman's daughter in a grey gown told me in this room that she would not be torn down for my convenience, and I have not had a single comfortable moment since, and I would not trade one of them for all the dignity in England. Let them laugh, Margaret. They will laugh for a season, and then they will find something else, and we will be at Westridge, and you will dust the library if you like, except that it will be your library, and I will read to you in it, and in 20 years no one will remember, that anyone laughed at all. Marry me. Not to spite the Countess. Not for a wall. Marry me because you are the first true thing I have found in 10 years, and I am not such a fool, whatever she made me, as to let a true thing walk out into the dark to save my pride. Margaret Felbridge looked up at him, and she made no choice at all this time, because there was none left to make. Jonathan, she said. His given name. The first time. She had not known until she said it how long she had wanted to. And the Duke of Dunwood, who had not been touched gently by anyone in 10 years, closed his eyes when she said it, as though it were a thing he had to brace himself to bear. The Countess of Ashmore made her scene after all, because women like the Countess always do, and it did not go as she had planned, because nothing at Westridge had gone as she planned, since the night a duke walked into his own library and found a housemaid who would tell him the truth. She gathered her audience at the last great dinner before the party broke up, choosing her moment with the skill of long practice, waiting until the table was full and the wine had gone round, and every eye was idle and hungry for diversion. And she rose, beautiful and terrible in her flattering black. And she said, in her carrying voice, that she had a confession to make, that her conscience would not let her leave Westridge without it, that the assembled company had been most cruelly deceived, and that the woman they had all been calling the Dukes intended the supposed Miss Felbridge, daughter of a gentleman, was in plain fact a housemaid in this very house, a servant, a girl who blacked the grates, dressed up in borrowed silk to make fools of them all. The silence was absolute. And into it, before the Duke could rise, before the laughter could begin, Margaret Felbridge stood up. She stood up in her green silk at the Duke of Dunwood's table, and she was not ashamed, and the room saw that she was not ashamed, and that did half her work for her before she ever spoke. The Countess is quite right, Margaret said, clearly, into the dreadful quiet. I am a servant. I came to this house in the autumn with everything I owned in one box, and I took a place as a housemaid, because my father, who was a clergyman and a better man than anyone at this table, died leaving me nothing but his debts and his good name, and I chose honest work over the dishonest comfort the world offered a penniless woman. I have blacked the grates of Westridge. I have scrubbed its floors on my knees. I have dusted its library every evening for an hour, and read its books while I did it, because a mind does not stop being hungry, merely because its owner has stopped being grand. She looked around the silent table, at the staring, fashionable faces, and she did not flinch from one of them. The Countess tells you this to shame me, and to shame your host, and she expects you to laugh. So laugh, if you wish. But understand what you are laughing at. You are laughing at a woman who has done honest work with her hands, which not one of you has ever done, and who is not ashamed of it, which is more than the Countess can say of how she has spent her own life. There is no shame in my hands. The shame, if there is any in this room, belongs to whoever taught you that there should be. And then the Duke of Dunwood stood up beside her, and took her reddened hand in his, in front of all of them, and held it up, and did not let it go. My grandmother lied to you about Miss Felbridge's connections, he said, and his voice was perfectly steady, and perfectly cold, and entirely unafraid. And I let her, and for that small deception I will beg your pardon, since you have come so far for your dinners. but understand me clearly, all of you, before you decide whether to laugh. Margaret Felbridge is the daughter of a gentleman, fallen on hard times through no fault of her own, who chose dignity over comfort when the world gave her the choice, and who is worth, in her honesty and her wit and her plain courage, more than every fortune at this table weighed together. I asked her to be my wife 3 nights ago, in earnest, and she did me the honour of accepting. And she will be the Duchess of Dunwood before the spring, and any guest under my roof who finds that a matter for laughter is welcome to find their carriage instead. The doors are wide. The night is fine. I will not detain you. No one laughed. That was the thing the Countess of Ashmore had not allowed for, and could not have allowed for, because she did not understand it. That a room only laughs at a man who is afraid of being laughed at. And the Duke of Dunwood was not afraid any more. He stood at his own table, holding a housemaid's hand, and daring the whole world to mock him. And the world, faced with a man who genuinely did not care, discovered that it had no power over him at all, and fell silent. And then, here and there, awkwardly, began to applaud. And the Countess of Ashmore stood, alone, at the foot of the table, in her flattering black, beautiful and frightened, and quite finished, and watched the room turn its warmth toward the housemaid, and away from her, and Margaret, looking at her across the candles, saw the exact moment the woman understood that she had lost, not just the Duke, but the gamble, the whole gamble, the last throw of a life built entirely on a beauty that the years were taking back. There would be no rich marriage now. There would be the debts, and the diminishing jointure, and the long, slow descent of a proud woman into shabby gentility, alone. It was a terrible thing to watch. Margaret had every reason to enjoy it, and found that she could not, found that what she felt was the same useless pity as before, because she knew, better than anyone in that bright room, exactly how cold it was where the Countess was going. The Countess left Westridge that night, in the dark, in her own carriage. She did not say goodbye. Margaret watched the carriage lamps go down the long avenue of limes, and out of sight, 2 small lights swallowed by the night, and she thought, there goes a woman who was never taught that there was anything to be but beautiful. And now the one thing she was taught is leaving her, and she has nothing underneath. And Margaret, who had been given so much less, and somehow so much more, a father who loved her, books, a mind, a stubborn, honest heart, stood in the great doorway of the house that was to be hers and grieved, a little for the woman who had tried to ruin her, because grief is what an honest heart feels, even for its enemies, when it watches them go down into the dark alone. They were married in the spring, in the small grey church in the valley below Westridge, and the county came, because the county always comes, and most of them came warmly, because a story of a duke who married for love against all sense is a story people like to have attended, and may tell their grandchildren they were part of. Margaret signed the register Margaret Felbridge for the last time, in her father's good name, the name the creditors had not been able to take after all, and she thought of him as she wrote it, the gentle, ruined man who had given her nothing the world could value, and everything that had let her survive the world, and she wished, with a grief that would never quite leave her on the bright days, that he had lived to see his penniless daughter become a duchess. Not for the rank of it. He would not have cared a straw for the rank, but because he would have been so quietly, completely glad that she was loved. That was the cost, and there was always a cost. The profile of every true happiness, she had learned, has a shadow cut into it. Her father had not lived to see it. The Countess of Ashmore had gone down into a poverty Margaret could not save her from, and would not have been thanked for trying. The years that Margaret had spent invisible, grey-gowned, hungry, reading by candlestub in stolen hours, those years were gone, and would not come again. The world did not give back what it took. It only, sometimes, if one was stubborn enough, and honest enough, and lucky enough, opened a door one had stopped believing in. But there was this. In the long, light evenings of that first married summer, the Duke and Duchess of Dunwood sat in the library at Westridge, which had been the beginning of everything, and which was hers now in plain fact and not in fiction, 10,000 books, and an hour that was no longer stolen, because no hour of her life was stolen any more. And sometimes he read to her, and sometimes she read to him, and sometimes they simply sat in the room where a desperate man had once caught a housemaid's hand and begged her to pretend, and said nothing at all because they had passed the place where pretending was needed and come out the other side into the rarer country where two people may be entirely silent together and entirely known. The library at Westridge had once been the one room where Margaret Felbridge was permitted to disappear. She did not disappear there any more. She sat in the lamplight of an evening with her husband's head against her shoulder, and her father's name in the register, and the whole long, invisible winter of her life behind her. And she was, at last, in the place where she had always been, most herself seen. Wholly, plainly, permanently seen. He had asked her, once in this room, to pretend. She never had to pretend again. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.